Oh, can I press the button is the first thing. Here we go. So I'm going to do a fairly quick whiz through this because obviously something the size of this ransomware incident, you could probably spend sort of 20 minutes on each slide. So have lots of questions for the end and I'll try and rattle through. And you can always contact me afterwards for sort of more information or background. So the first thing is basically Royal Mail is not the post office, just to help people with the separation. It's a privately owned company, but even I got it mixed up during my interview, so it's quite easy to do. I think about the post. To give you an idea of the sort of scale, because obviously you all know Royal Mail, it delivers post to you, but the part of the business that was impacted was actually our international business. And to give you a scale, 630,000 parcels a day go in and out of the UK through Royal Mail. So you can imagine 2-3 days worth of parcels, you're already heading towards the millions, and we were talking several weeks worth of parcels. So what you start to see is that sort of effect of what happens. Bear in mind I'm former CISO of Royal Mail, I'm not there, I'm representing myself and my views and not the company. I just want to sort of make that one clear. 10th of January last year, basically, I get an email which I didn't read because I've been on back-to-back conference calls. So a colleague phoned me up and said, the site director of this site has just sent an email asking for a meeting to say they think they've got ransomware in the international business. That part of the company was not managed by central IT, so basically there were no sort of easy processes to trigger. And obviously, being such a big company, 130,000 people, I didn't know everyone in the company and they didn't know me. So the reality was that this sort of thing triggered sort of first thing in the morning. The business thought it was just an operational outage. It stopped their sorting machinery from working, sorting parcels. They ran their normal sort of engineering support who dialed in and sort of started to see files being encrypted. So that guy thought, hey, it looks like maybe encryption ransomware. I'll power down the AD servers and the servers and I'll start driving in. So he was doing that. Meanwhile, as he's driving in, local printers start spitting out a ransomware note. So basically this started spitting out on machines, and luckily one of our members of staff, because you may have known there was industrial action, decided to photograph this and put it out on Twitter. So an hour and a half into the thing, I still didn't have the scale, I was still trying to find contact with the local site. I'm already being asked by corporate comms, public affairs have been contacted by MPs, the press have been contacting in to start giving out statements. So that's how it sort of started. On one hand, I'm making phone calls like, who do I even talk to? Locally and find out what's going on. I was in one of our London offices and the main site hit was out at Heathrow. I remember talking to the site director going, I need to get hold of your IT guy, and he's telling me it's a very large building. 2 days later when I'm down there, I found out it's a 40,000 square metre building, and I'm telling this guy he's not leaving the mobile phone until he's found the IT person for me. So you can imagine the sort of sense of scale. You know, think 200 metre by 200 metre building on 3 floors. So quite interesting start to it. We basically were asked for $80 million, £65 million. Later on we found out it was Lockbit, the real Lockbit, but basically this sort of stuff was going on, very publicly played out. Lots and lots of people give their opinions, so I'm sure you've all seen sort of cyber people online, on websites, I won't name any, on TV and everything, and everyone seemed to know what was going on apart from me. And obviously you get under pressure because you've got government saying what's going on, you're under a license to deliver the post and it's not happening. You've got the fallout still from things like Brexit, with now having to move customs forms to get anything out of the UK, so the business itself was triggering. And most organisations, and I think this is true of everyone, the big difference between, I'm going to say, a data breach incident and something like a ransomware that impacts your availability is, in the nicest way, a data breach, which I've been involved in another organisation, the business carries on. So primarily it's legal, yes, you've got some reputational damage, bits of IT and bits of cyber are heavily into a data breach, but actually everything in the business is still working. You know, people are using their email, they're still logging into HR systems, in this case parcel sorting is still happening, whereas in a ransomware incident like this, things just stop. So to give you an idea, we're 2,000 people in that site, what do? The local site director is asking me, what do I tell these people? They're turning up to work and they can't sort parcels in the normal way. Obviously you've got the wider business saying, is it affecting us? And meanwhile, in such a large estate, we're looking around saying, is there any other effect? So you get that sort of sense of scale. Sorry, I can't press the buttons properly. So to give you an idea of timeline, we all hear about the 200 days in the environment dwell time. Ours was quite short. It was actually only about 6 days, which we found out after the sort of event forensics. So basically the threat actor got in, got some initial access, Had prodded a little bit in the December, got in the 4th of January, did some lateral movement, did some credential escalation, and basically then did their execution 6 days later, which is what caused that effect. So fairly sort of short timeline compared with what you hear. Just for clarity, it affected OT, operational technology, parcel sorting machinery. It wasn't the core. It was actually only sort of 6 sites in a sort of segmented part of the network that was impacted, but they were in Europe, in Ireland and across the UK. And really at the very beginning I had to do a lot of isolation, which I'll talk about a bit later on, because at sensor scale you just don't know how long things are lasting. Then what happened was, after that trigger, we started triggering to sort of the business and service response processes. And also threat actor engagement. Because it went public so quickly, we actually had to contact the threat actor, which normally you want a bit more of a controlled timeline, because there's been cases of national security, press people, white hat hackers actually logging on and pretending to be the company and talking to the threat actors, and then actually triggering the wrong response from the threat actors. This has happened. So we had to go in and start saying it was us, it wasn't those threat actors, was it them? So we didn't actually know it was them to start with, because again, someone could have logged on pretending to be them, and sort of go through that process. In the perfect world, you'd have wanted a bit more time so you could actually manage that situation. Similar with the press. I didn't want to be writing press statements an hour and a half in. So it's again about, sometimes you may have a plan, you might have an ideal timeline, and things just happen. So we started then the containment stuff. As I mentioned, somebody tweeted the notes, had people in the executive team saying, who did it? I'm like, does it matter? It's out there. Could you ever find out who actually took the photo and put it up on a dummy Twitter account? Probably not. It doesn't really matter. You just got to live with it. And basically it took till sort of back end of February to get post back into flow in normal operation. What I mean by that is consumers, us as our sort of customers, were able to go then and put a parcel into the postal system and it would come out the other end. That doesn't mean everything underlying was fixed. That took many months to actually rebuild the environment, to actually bring it back to speed. So that's just to give you a bit of a flavour of the overview. So I'm going to just run quickly through 6 key work streams. I actually had at one point 17 work streams going. Yeah, but the quick ones is crisis management. So what's the difference in your company between a crisis that's caused by HR, industrial action, some other issue, or a cyber incident? And so I'd work with my colleagues to make sure there was clarity between the CISO's role, where I was the trigger, the hub of the crisis, to say this is what's going on, but I don't know how to shift parcels. So I made sure the crisis team was calling out all the other parts of the organisation, and we had a sort of gold, silver and bronze tiered system where gold was the exec team, silver was the next team down, and sort of bronze was the operating team. So within the first hour or so, I was saying call out the silver team, call out every function of the business and get them in a room while I'm still doing discovery. By the lunchtime, I was saying this is looking like ransomware, it's going to be at least a couple of weeks before anything's moving. By the evening, I was saying it's going to be at least a couple of months. The challenge is most businesses, most of us as users of technology, expect IT to fix stuff. So most of you will have had a Sev1, you'll have had a key system out, but normally people are going, oh, I don't want to trigger my BCP plans, I don't want to do ITDR because it's painful if we go down that path. And so basically quite quickly, people go, even if it's a couple of days, we'll cope. But the problem with a ransomware incident is it's multiple systems down. It's that maybe a whole chunk of your business stopping operating. So your IT function might be geared up for 1, 2, 3, 4 parallel Sev1s, but not 10. Your business teams need some triggering to go, no, you really need to start kickstarting things. In this case, warehouse space, 630,000 parcels, lorries turning up with more and more parcels, consumers still going to every post office in the country handing stuff across the counter. You can't suddenly stop that flow. And I said we had 5 weeks. Imagine how many parcels. I'm going to go through calculation. So not only did we have them stacking up, even when we got back to operation, we had to go through all the backlog in parallel. Yeah. So the business impact was massive. Containment, blast radius. I had pre-agreed the authority difference between me as a CISO and the CIO. So basically, I had the empowerment to cut things off without asking permission. Have your CIOs and CISOs agreed that? Has your business leadership done it? Yeah, I could have screwed up and it might have been a fake. In fact, there was some jokes even amongst the exec team, John, this isn't one of your surprise tests, is it? Even for the first few days, because it was like, is it real, is it not real? So think about the blast radius, isolate systems. How many of you have really up-to-date asset management programs? How many of you would actually open the book and go, yeah, IT know exactly where everything is? Yeah, that's the reality of life is. And even if you do you have the time to go and read it all? I had 1,500 sites in the UK. What interconnections, what platforms, what systems are involved? So you've got to have some pre-agreement of what's going on. You're looking for other attacks. I have been in other situations where I've had double attacks, even from other attackers at the same time as the primary one advertised. So you're having to ramp up your service partners, your SOC, other parts of the business, even our contact centre, the social media team in corporate comms. Are we seeing any other noise? Are we seeing any other threats come in? Because you're ramping this up as just a separate work stream, even though you're on this discovery phase. And we even stopped phishing campaign. Because obviously most people are doing some sort of phishing awareness and so on. It's because we need to stop false positives. So we actually stopped our own campaign so that if anyone reported anything, it was more likely to be a real thing. So again, things like that we were even having to do. As I mentioned, there's an insatiable appetite for comms, and I'll go into this in another slide in a bit more detail. But you've got everyone, press, customers, public, regulators, your staff that are directly impacted, the rest of the company staff who think they might be impacted, your own team, the cyber team, the IT team, everyone's got a different motive for information. Even National Crime Agency and National Security, NCSC, have two different motives. So you've got to give everyone an amount of consistent information, but not too much because you can't withdraw it very easily, because the reality is it'll go public whoever you tell. Yeah. Investigation, which I get into a little bit more as well, which is the impact of the system. So everyone talks about we don't want to pay a ransomware ransom because very emotionally, yeah, giving money to criminals doesn't sound like a good idea. The reality is during your ransomware impact for your company, you may have to make decisions you don't want to make and actually pay. And a very high proportion of companies are still paying. But you've got to look at your legality, your regulatory obligations, the factors externally, etc., that would enable you to make that decision. Sorry, pressed the button wrong again. And then the threat actor themselves, as I said, I quite early engaged National Security NCA because you're trying to say, is this a real Lockbit? Is it just an affiliate of Lockbit? Are we actually negotiating with the right people? Is this an impersonator? Can they unencrypt? Can we validate the files? You've got lots and lots of traction going on. And then why am I negotiating? So what's my objective for this part of the negotiation? Is it to buy time? Is it to do something else? So there's lots and lots of factors there. And if you did want to pay, are you legally allowed to pay? So are you going to be on any any sort of list that say you can't pay people because of sanctions? It may not be a law in this country you can't pay, but it might be a sanctioned entity or individual. So there's lots and lots of different things going on. And then the recovery itself, again, the CISO's got to be careful that you don't take ownership to try and fix the business. Because the reality is, if whether it's your HR systems or in this case OT systems go down, then what is it that your role is as the cyber function? You can't fix your business. Have they got BCP plans? Have they ever tested them? Have they thought about a wider impact outage than just a system down for a day or two and we'll go back to paper? So some fairly sort of major things need to go on. So comms, I'll deep dive into just the three of them. So comms, the reality is as a CISO in this situation, between 50 and 70% of my time, and I was running 18 to 20 hour days for 6 weeks and then another 6 months on top of that, was comms. Because you're the one getting hubbed information, whether it's from your forensics investigation team, whether it's from national security, whether it's from the business saying what's the impact, how long do we last. 50 to 70% of the CISO's time is comms. I even end up hiring extra people in and build my own comms team to work with corporate comms, HR, DPO, public affairs, etc. to get consistency. But it is literally multiple times a day, from gold teams to silver teams, I said press, etc. And that is a big part of the role. It even surprised me in this situation even more than when I've been in a big public data breach. But that is something that I think surprised everything, and everyone wants it from their angle. So I said National Crime Agency want to prosecute someone, National Security want to know it's a nation state attack, but they also want to know can they settle Parliament down if you're linked into sort of any sort of critical services. You've then got your executive team, which each member has their own focus. Your non-executive team, the NEDs, don't want their reputations tarnished. You've then, as I said, got your own team trying to find out everything to explain to a cyber team that they're going to be compartmentalised, and actually there were less than 10 people in the whole company that actually understood what we were doing with the threat actor. So even the exec team was a subset that talked about the threat actor engagement. Even a subset of the board was involved in the threat actor engagement. Have you pre-discussed that with your CEO? and chief legal counsel, who's actually going to be involved in the discussion? Because why does the chief commercial officer need to be in there? Why does the HR director need to be in there? Because the moment something leaks and you're trying to sort of have a certain thread of conversation with your threat actor and somebody leaks it, then your whole strategy is down the toilet. So really, really narrow. Decision making, corporate governance, even for the recovery project, might cost you millions. Your CEO will probably still have a threshold of what they can sign off before they have to go to their board, whether it's a private company, a VC company, or a public company. Have they thought about the governance that this could be 10, 20 million quid of recovery? Have they even thought about that? And again, you want to try and do this stuff before the event. And of course, everyone wants to know when things have turned back to normal. And the reality is, as the CISO, how do you know? Yeah, you don't operate the business. It's not, why are you asking me? Have you thought about it yourself? I don't know what normal means to you. And again, lots of parts of your business may not even understand themselves because they've probably built their departments, processes and IT systems over years. And therefore, there might be a few people that understand this bit of the system or that bit of the process, but actually many of your businesses, and I've worked cross-sector, just won't understand what's going on. Investigation. The first thing we think of, particularly cyber folks, is who did it. Yeah? And the reality is it doesn't matter at the beginning, most of the time. And the reason being is you've got to figure out what actually matters to your business. In our case, it was availability. So the threat actors had taken a bunch of files, they told us they'd taken a bunch of files, we'd had to switch off all the systems, power everything down. I had over 2,000 IT assets actually shipped into a single space. I had to even hire people to do asset counting so we knew what was in and out. And then we had to try and figure out which systems might have files we could recover on, which ones were encrypted and which ones weren't. Which led to 90 terabytes of forensic imaging. Then you start talking to executive teams, you go, what's a terabyte? Then you start to explain that it takes 12 hours just to image 1 terabyte. And how many bits of kit can you buy across your part of the country? So I had my forensics partner buy every single bit of kit to parallel run, but it's 12 hours before you can start looking at the disks. Then you've got to hope the IT people that you've talked to actually are targeting, we think it was on that system, these types of files. So you're looking at what's your availability issues. In our case, they've taken a lot of PLC controller files, the logistics controller files that manage the OT, and we needed to find another copy. Otherwise, we had over 3 miles of mechanical engineering stuff that was going to just be a pile of metal. And again, in OT environments particularly, a lot of the backups from the same network, so a lot of them are dinged. So you've got to really start to understand what matters to you. Then engineering network, I was told there was no confidential data. But I had to prove that because before I could say categorically, no customer data in the network, therefore to the public, your data's safe. Then to the staff, your data's safe. I had a subset team who basically was DPO team, my team, software engineering, had to go through all the file transfer files, how many people work with developers who reuse a report and put hidden fields in it with extra data in it that shouldn't be there, and we had to go through and search all of that. And I can say this bit because it's public, you can go and see what the threat actor eventually published, but basically we found somebody more than 10 years ago backed up an EA's laptop. And on that laptop were return to work records, health and medical information of people and so on. But there was almost 1 million files, and we identified all apart from about 8,000 odd, and then had to run all those through e-discovery. So at one point we had like 20 paralegals. Then once we'd done the electronic e-discovery, actually eyeballing the sort of target file structure to find what was in there. So again, that's just one work stream of activity. And then obviously once the attacker releases all the stuff that they've published, you then got to go and download it to check it's the same stuff and run it all back through e-discovery again. So things that you may not have thought about. Oh, sorry, actually. And then the important one, root cause isn't always the priority. So I'm really good at, I'm going to call it rubbish analogies. So what I did was I had to explain to management, we know someone's burgled our house. Yeah? And we know that because the house is a mess. We're now going through each drawer and cupboard in the house to discover if they actually stole anything. And then what we do know is they then piled everything up in the living room, but we don't know if they took it out the living room window, the front door or the back door. And then later on it's like, we don't know quite how they got into the house. Did they pick up a key off the garden path because someone dropped it? Did someone not quite lock the door? Did they break in, jimmy the locks all together? But at a certain point, the cost of finding that out versus the benefit becomes, doesn't always matter. And I've been involved in fraud investigations, so maybe my mindset's that is, yeah, I really want to know the answer. I'm a cyber guy, we all want perfection. But the bottom line is, it may not matter. And therefore, you've got to be able to explain even to management, so what? Yeah, we know the house has been broken into, burgled, let's seal up the doors and start again. Payment decisions. So this is what you really want to try and run through with your current management team before the event happens. So you need to be talking to them about what are the considerations for the impacted environment. And the reality is that many organisations haven't actually thought through whether they'd pay or not. Lots of people say they wouldn't. But if 1 million people's worth of private personal medical data and everything else was going to be put out on the internet and damage 1 million people, is that morally a better or worse situation than paying a threat actor? And so they're the sort of decisions your executive team, you as a CISO, your job is to inform, work with legal, get proper legal advice, have really expensive people who are writing down all the meeting notes because they all need to be attorney privilege. So you don't want to be writing any of this down. But basically you've got to have those discussions openly, and that management team have to make the decisions with data you're providing, and you're just one of those providers. And then if that threat actor is going to be paid, are you robust enough to actually withstand another attack? And there have been agreements. You'll get really good advice from NCA and national security during these things, but there have been cases where people have agreed with a threat actor, don't attack us for a year, we'll pay you, don't come back, but a year to the day they come back and attack them again. So the rest of your environment isn't robust enough. And then you get other interesting discussions, and this is my sort of sense of humour, which is, okay, so we pay these people, who don't forget, are criminals. So we're going to pay them. If they go down the pub and get really drunk, who do you think their friends are? Are they other criminals? Are they other criminal gangs? And if they're suddenly flush with cash, they got it from somewhere. So the reality is you've got all these different considerations. But as I mentioned, can you deliver your services anyway? Have you got business alternatives? Can the equipment be reused or rebuilt? Do you need to go and buy another set of equipment because you're still doing forensics, but you need to get your business back together? Commercial impact to customers and revenue. So obviously, if you're a fully online business and that's your only revenue source, it could be you have to sort of take the risk of paying and going back early, because otherwise you literally got no income or no business. Reputational risk, customers, regulators, other stakeholders, each of you will be in different companies with different thought processes around that. You have to take that into consideration. If those answers aren't satisfactory, could paying lead to a better outcome? So decryption takes time. Don't forget, some of the threat actors, the decryption doesn't work properly. So part of the negotiation is trying to get proof of, can you do it? But just because you get your files back, would you want to put your hand in a machine not knowing what else is on that system? And they could have left stuff behind even with the decryption. So again, those sort of things. Future threats, as I mentioned, the threat actor is still going to have your data. They can still say, I'll delete it, but they can still have your data. And moral and ethical, as I said, there is a whole piece around that. There's the emotive part of, I don't want to pay a criminal. This stuff might be going to human trafficking, it might be going to drugs, it might be going to whatever, but there's also the other moral, which is what's it do to my customer, my company and everything else, and that's a balancing act. NCSC have published subsequent to our thing, we have given some input. I'm not saying that they used what we did, but we worked really closely with them. But the bottom line is the ultimate decision to pay is with the company, is their view. So governments obviously doesn't want you to pay. In the nicest way, I wouldn't personally want to pay, but as I said, never say never, or never write that down in case you have to refute it. Threat actor negotiation, I'm just going to throw up a few things. It got published, so you can go and read this online if you want to, but there was what they do is they give you a data tree, but not actually where the files come from. So you're trying to sort of validate, have they really stolen this, or have they just fallen on a directory list? Because they could have just stolen the directory list. So you have to ask for evidence from them about the files and can they decrypt them and so on. We started talking about valuable files. We started talking about can you undo things? I thought I'd chance it and go, here's a 6 gig server. It'd be quite handy if they decrypted that for us, but they obviously cottoned on to, I was trying to get more than a couple of files decrypted. They start using negotiation tactics like the percentage of revenue. They start explaining that actually it'd be cheaper to pay us than it would be to pay the fine to the ICO under GDPR. So they're using all tactics they can think of for negotiation once it's handed off. We used the fact that this was a subsidiary and part of the organisation, so it wasn't the core organisation. We actually even used press statements throughout the year before about during the industrial action that most of you will probably remember. Royal Mail was using £1 million a day, so it was saying we haven't actually got a profitable company. We were using different tactics. Our main thing was to buy time so we could make these decisions. We managed to actually stretch it out for 3 weeks of negotiation, sort of doing these various things. Interestingly, towards the end, we didn't just suddenly say we're not going to pay, we just sort of petered things out, which got them frustrated. They actually threatened us. I remember 3 in the morning, one morning, there were 4 of us sitting around this screen waiting for Lockbit to publish, and then it was an anti-climax because having stayed up all night, they didn't actually publish, and then they threatened again, and then they threatened again, and then finally they published. So it was all, are they doing it? Also, their infrastructure is pretty crap, pretty bad coming the other direction. So the bottom line is it then took several days to download what they'd stolen, because they don't pay for nice big bandwidth from their site that they're releasing the files. So we're all sitting there going, is it what we thought it is? Trying to get it downloaded, and they said then run it back through Discovery. They talked about they didn't publish things in an online transcript, like they offered our negotiator a 10% cut of whatever he got and our response, and they actually even quoted another company at the same time who had paid a ransom to them, so they didn't publish that part either. Here's a quick summary of some of the themes. We obviously made contact, requested proof of the data theft, etc. We actually chose a persona that was sort of fairly low skilled. So you'll see that we often did things like, we've got to refer to management. On a Friday night we'd go in when we knew the threat actor wasn't there because of time zoning. You're even looking at the time zones the threat actors like to log in and try and log in when they're not there. And sort of create a bit of space. It's a Friday night, here's our answer, we'll wait till Monday, so you buy yourself an extra weekend. So it's all about sort of why are you doing your negotiation, what's your strategy at that point in time, which may transition during the journey. So as I said, we primarily negotiate to buy time, to be able to make sensible decisions, understand what the impact would be. We didn't pay the ransom, and as I said, the threat actor did publish the files and the transcript. So the other key thing is whatever you write in your transcript, be prepared, it'll go public, whether you pay or not. So also make sure that you're understanding what you're writing back, and so on. Hence the small group of people involved in the discussions of this is the general direction, then sort of we had lots of checking. So what went well? What went well was we put in place quite a robust crisis framework. We actually practiced quite a lot during industrial action, so we're sort of, if you like, the gold and silver team, sort of we're used to that sort of type of rhythm. So it doesn't necessarily have to be cyber that practices, but have your exec team ever actually had a gold meeting? Do they understand they have to pause and wait? They can't just keep ringing around people and find an answer separately. So do they even understand that? Do your silver team, have they even met each other? You might get functions that have never ever worked together, but suddenly in a crisis they're put into the same room. IT and engineering, or HR and engineering, parts of the organisation never talk to each other. Threat actor engagement, what's your strategy? Are you going to use a negotiator? Are you going to negotiate yourself? Who's going to actually do that? What's the strategy? Why are you engaging? So again, that whole sort of, have you even had that talk through as a tabletop discussion with the exec team? Who's even going to be in the room? Which members of the board are even going to be informed? Because again, you don't want the whole board necessarily in there. In our case, we work closely with stakeholders and regulators very closely, and also with national security and NCA to get input. They're really helpful, both in terms of data and understanding, etc. And also, what's your media strategy and your reputational strategy? As I mentioned, comms is so important. You can't say no customer data is involved and then suddenly turn around the other direction 2 weeks later and go, actually, we found some customer data. That reputation is going to cripple your company. So sometimes it was painful. I mean, I remember going to something and someone told me it was through a phishing attack, and I was like, that's really interesting. They didn't know who I was. And they told me the Royal Mail incident, they knew all about it. And I said there's lots of articles of people's opinions online of what the attack was and how it happened. And what we chose to do was retain control of the ship, if you like. So it was our decisioning, or we didn't hand it over to sort of criminal investigations. We had forensic retainers, we had specialist legal advisors, corporate comms, but as an organisation we wanted to manage that situation quite closely. So that was sort of pretty much the core whiz through. I don't know how many minutes I've got left. I've left a space for questions, because you could talk about anything from the technical to the threat actor to whatever. So open to questions.
Amazing. Thank you, Jon, for that. I would like to open it up to questions. I know we're a couple of moments late starting. No, it's fantastic. From my perspective, it's just wow in terms of the incredible scale of what you've had to manage through there. Has anybody got any? Gentlemen just here, if we go to mic to him. Thank you.
As I understand it, it's currently legal for a company to pay ransomware. If the law was changed and it became illegal to pay these sorts of demands, do you think that would help to improve security by reducing the risk of ransomware attacks or not?
I think attackers will still attack organisations because it's an extortion, and in the nicest way, a bit like the FCPA and stuff. There's people have to try and find a workaround to solve the problem. So I personally am not a big fan of banning it, because I don't think it'll help organisations manage things in the right way, and everyone's got a different risk factor. Does government have the right to put a company out of business? And it might be the right thing for a company to pay, because otherwise they might literally go out of business, and then you might have a few thousand people jobless, customers damaged as well. So I think there's too many nuances, having been really in the thick of it.
Okay, fantastic. Any other questions? Just 1 second.
I can't hear him anyway.
I knew there'd be a few questions. That's good.
You might have to repeat this.
So, you're obviously, the speech, it was great. We've recently been victims of a ransomware attack ourselves, so a lot of what you've just gone through has resonated with me. We're a SME. Obviously, you're talking from a much wider scale, so what advice can you give to smaller businesses, really, because who haven't got the resource that, a multi...
Yeah, so the reality is that I think my analogy is be able to phone the equivalent of at home. If you have a fire in your house, you the first thing you do is you know how to dial 999. So I'd say irrelevant of protective controls and detective controls take money and time to put in place in any organisation, whatever their scale. Yeah, because everything's proportional. Big companies like Royal Mail, 1,500 sites, just putting a network detection across 30,000 endpoints isn't a quick project. Equally, if it's a small business. So I'd say make sure you understand how to respond. Smart people in any organisation can cope with something, but if you don't even have each other's phone numbers, if your executive team has never actually thought about what could happen, if you haven't partnered with your CIO and made it clear, do I have the authorities to switch things off, or do I have to ring 5 people in your service organisation by which time the attack spread? So that's what I'm saying. So for me, I go for day one, respond first. If you then got a little bit more money, start putting smoke detectors in the most likely places. So in your house, you put one in maybe in the kitchen. So whether that detection is training people to start with and then electronic equipment, but I go for that end first. Replacing all the locks on your house, you might be halfway through the process because you have to sort of save your pocket money every month to do that, but the reality is you might be burgled and you still don't know how to ring for help. Does that make sense? So if I was a SME, I'd start with do we even know who to talk to, and what if? It doesn't have to be some massive BCP and ITDR plan, because again, that can take business units years. But if you suddenly say, if the HR payroll system goes off, what we're going to do, CFO says I'll ring the bank and just get them to rerun last month's payroll, and we'll true up later, then okay, there's their plan.
Okay, I think, have we got another one just at the back there?
Hi, John. Thank you very much. Sounds horrendous, but also fascinating. So thank you for sharing that incident. I've been through something similar myself. Can you hear me okay?
I can now.
You can? All right. I've been something through. My point is, you talked about the incident starting, and it was weeks, then it was months. How did you protect the well-being of the incident response team, and maybe even your own well-being, managing through that kind of exercise?
No, really good question, and you can do a whole talk on it. So on the reality is, and this goes to the CISO, I think as a CISO, the reality is that you've got to swallow the first few days. You're going to be on it full time. I'd had a previous incident that turned out not to be a cyber incident. The previous November, I ran for 40 hours straight without sleep or anything. So sometimes you have to do it. I think as a CISO, part of it is understanding that. So within because I put in place more forensic retainers, which are quite cheap to put in place. Once you pick your company, you only start paying sort of when it happens. So even an SME can do that. Basically, within the first couple of days, I said, look, let's go to 12-hour shifts. And then by that weekend, it happened on a Thursday. By the weekend, I said from Monday, it's 8-hour shifts. But the first couple of days for the core team is full on, even with the retainers. However, your SOC team are already still they can't do a lot. They're not necessarily in that because you've got the rest of your estate to look after, haven't you? So they can sort of always carry on with their day jobs. But the thing is, have you got an ability to ramp? And this goes back to that decision making with the executive team up front. So for instance, I've in my last few companies pre-agreed with CFO a budget code that any cost, not just the cyber team, IT costs, business costs, everything goes to one cost centre, because then it can be found out, trued up later. And actually I have authority to not go through the procurement process, because we all know how great procurement processes are in every company. So basically you want some sort of, well, have I got a financial spend cap or whatever? So that's one way. And then the other side with legal is, if you have to have some lawyers at 2 a.m. reading contracts, you're going to have a problem. So having that discussion starts to get the business leadership or understanding what could really happen. And then you have to make a choice. I have worked in other companies where we've said, right, we can't all run 40 hours straight for every day back to back. So some companies have been in it, like, well, down tools at the weekend. Some of our vendors are doing some investigation components, and we'll do it that way. We did a lot of check-ins, a lot of carbs, from pizzas to chocolate to telling people to take their wives out for meals to whatever during the process. But if I was doing it again at this scale, although I used HR and line management a lot for that support, I'd probably have a dedicated person whose only job was to keep checking in with people. So every time I saw a busy set of people, like I mentioned, I ramped up a whole comms team. I got more third parties in and said, right, that's a sub-comms team. My SOC director is the second day in the company. So I was like, well, you can't possibly know anything about the actual organisation, so just do what you're good at and try and niche her and not get everyone involved in everything. I think that's the key, is cyber folks, because we're all inquisitive people, we're all perfectionists, we always want to do everything, get involved in everything. And the key part was keeping everyone in their work streams. And so one of my risk managers was the one that worked with privacy and worked with the software development to go through all those files, because what else was I going to do? I didn't need lots of risk write-ups and GRC write-ups, so all right, you can do that. Big other one is the business had to stop a bunch of business projects. So me and the CIO worked really well together. We had to go, we're going to take all these good people off all these business projects that were your priority that you've planned for the last year, and we're going to move them on to this. So your BISOs or your consultants, hike them off, stop project management. I had authority to call for any BA and project manager from the wider IT pool. So part of it as a CISO is understanding you can't fix it. And I think 20 years ago I tried to fix it all by myself, I'll be honest with you. I've learned over the years you just need to segment it and start giving accountability back where it belongs.
Amazing, brilliant. Thank you for that question, because I was going to ask us something very, very similar myself.
Yeah. For my own one, I sort of thrive a little bit on it, but I've had 20 years of doing BCP and fraud and earthquakes and other things. I've been lucky or unlucky with different experiences that have got me a bit used to major disasters.
Amazing. Thank you so much to Jon. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks.